Virginia. Beautiful. So a bunch of you were together with me, concluding the course last night. As I mentioned, for me, it's bittersweet. It's always sweet to do something and to complete something, but also bitter because it means the end of something, right? But have no fear, Mashiach is here. As the song goes, Am Yisrael, have no fear, Mashiach will be here this year. So we're going to continue learning about Mashiach and to add, in order that we can, do everything that we can to bring the final redemption. So before we get into a little more in-depth learning, based on things that we learned previously, any questions, any comments, any thoughts coming from the 6 weeks of the JLI course? Anybody? Tim, I see you're unmuted, and I see you have some Talmudic scholars behind you that they're already having a discussion, debating the issue.
Yes.
So chime in.
Oh, I apologize. I missed last night's JLI meeting on Mashiach. I guess the last one. I feel awful.
I don't feel awful because you're going to be sent tonight the link.
Thank you.
You could catch up. So you could catch up. But yeah, it was for me it was like 6 weeks of a Farbringen. It wasn't like teaching really. It was like a Farbringen. That's the way I felt. I don't know, Liba, Davida, also was there Reggie. Any thoughts? All right. Okay, excellent. Okay. Let us go into greater depth and to understand more deeply from the Rambam's teachings. As we have mentioned, the Rambam is the halachic source for Mashiach. In other words, when you look at Jewish law, if you look at the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, the abridged version, you're going to see that they are going to be dealing with about 87 of the 248 laws of the Torah. 87 merely. Because in exile, that's all we have access to is 87 mitzvahs. Times of Mashiach, and what Mashiach is to accomplish is to give us full access. That's why we need building of the Holy Temple, the ingathering of the Jewish people, that will give us the capability of a complete, full relationship with Hashem through Torah, mitzvahs, and complete revelation of God's presence here in this world. So Rambam is the only one that goes through all of the laws that are not applicable today. Some others go through, some other commentators go through some of the laws, but the Rambam goes through every single law. So therefore, it's very important that we have an understanding and appreciation of the Rambam's teachings in this. So we have learned till now, chapter 11, the second last chapter of Yad HaChazaka, of the Mishnah Torah, from the Rambam. And now we're going to go and jump to chapter 12. Chapter 11 speaks about Mashiach himself. And what are the qualities Mashiach needs? What are the functions that Mashiach needs to accomplish? And we've, dealt at great length with that concept. Now, what's it going to be like in the times of Mashiach? So in the JLI course, also the 5th class was about Mashiach. The 6th class that we ended off with was in the times of Mashiach. But now what we're going to do is go dig a little deeper, try to understand the Rambam's teachings more profoundly. So let us look right on the screen. So I share the screen with you. There we go. So the Rebbe writes, in the concluding chapter of the Hilchos Malachim, the Rambam, he presents the following principles regarding the era of the ultimate redemption. One should not entertain the notion that any element of the natural order will be nullified in the era of Mashiach, or that there will be any innovation in the work of creation. Rather, the world will continue according to its pattern. Although Isaiah, Yeshayahu, states, a wolf will dwell with a lamb, these words are an allegory and a metaphor. They mean that Israel will dwell securely together with the wicked idolaters who are likened to wolves and leopards, as it is written, a wolf of the desert robs them. So the nations of the world, who among them there is wicked idolaters meaning someone who doesn't truly believe in God, and therefore they do acts of cruelty. So they will be anti-Semitic. We have anti-Semitism today. Why? Because we got wolves. And they do terrible things to the Jewish people, right? What will happen in times of Mashiach? The wolf will dwell with the lamb. The Jewish people are like the lamb, and we will dwell together, meaning there won't be anti-Semitism. As opposed to that literally the wolf and the lamb will dwell together. The Rambam saying that this is an allegory and not to be taken, therefore, literally. Okay, in this era, all nations will return to true faith and no longer plunder or destroy. Instead, they will eat that which is permitted, as it is written. Second. As it is written, the lion shall eat straw. Similarly, all other prophecies of this type concerning Mashiach are analogies. In the era of King Mashiach, everyone will realize that this was implied by these analogies. What was implied by these analogies and allusions? In other words, it's an analogy to something. We don't necessarily know what it is today. Mashiach will come, it will become obvious to us. So I mentioned this before. Well, you know what, let's finish off over here and then. Similarly, all other prophecies of this type concerning Mashiach are analogies. Rambam then continues and summarizes. Our sages taught in the Talmud that there's no difference between the current age and the era of Mashiach, except our emancipation from subjugation from the non-Jewish kingdoms, as will be explained later. Okay. So what do we have here? Very clearly, that these are an analogy, right? The idea of the wolf with the lamb, and the era of Mashiach, there's so many things that our prophets said that we don't necessarily know what they mean today, but then we will come to know what they mean. So mentioned previously that, in the times of Mashiach, and this is not based really on the prophecies as much as what we're learning in Hasidus. We're learning in Hasidus to be able to know God within creation, right? So we learn about Malchus of Atzilus. We learn about how that is the word of God vests itself into the intelligence of the world of Bria, and it creates and something from nothing, from no thing to something God creates, right? And so we learn a lot about these ideas. that we understand in our mind's eye to some degree. Mashiach will come. What will happen? The presence of God will be so palpable. How palpable will it be? Well, as we learned, the difference between this is Gola means exile, and Geula means redemption, redeemed times, the times of Mashiach. What's the difference? They're both the same words, except an aleph. The letter aleph is the difference between the two. Exile and redemption, that's all. So everything, as Rambam says, will remain the same. There's not going to be any difference, except one letter, aleph, which represents God, the presence of God, God being palpable, right? Why will there not be anti-Semitism? Just people are just not going to be anti-Semites anymore. What? Won't be a good business anymore for them. BLM is making good stuff, making good money. The people on the top there, not going to give it up. Got nothing to do with values. It's got to do with everything, but that. So why are they going to give it up? Because God is concealed now. He's hidden. There's no aleph. There's no the oneness of God. It's hidden in exile. It'll be revealed, so there won't be anti-Semitism. Nature will stay the same. It will stay the same. But what we will perceive is a presence of God in a palpable way. So, of course, that will lead to not being greedy, no more wars, and so on. But what that also will lead to is the things that we're learning now, that we know intellectually in our mind's eye. But when Mashiach will come, say, aha, yeah, oh my gosh. Because the world around us that we now know by learning Tanya, learning Hasidus, that we have an understanding how everything is a metaphor, this world. For what? The presence of God. But we only know it intellectually in the mind's eye. Mashiach comes. It's not in the mind's eye anymore. It's palpable. It's real. Oh, I get it now. Well, we learned this in Tanya, and I see it. It's real. So this is what the Rambam is saying over here. The Rambam is saying that nature will stay the same. Right? What's the nature of the world? Nature of the world is the way it is. But nature will stay the same. Miracles will not happen. Do we even need a miracle? We need a miracle. All you need is the presence of God. In a sense, that's the greatest miracle. But in a way, it's not, because it's God just hidden. That will become revealed. That will become present to us. The truth and the reality of God. And that's what the Rambam is talking about. So when we speak about metaphors, the lamb and the wolf, all of that is a metaphor ultimately to understand how the presence of God will be reflected in this world. So it will be reflected the nations of the world, who really, almost all hate us. They don't back, not supportive. I mean, not all, not all, but, almost all of Europe, right? Asia, not a real friend. Why? How could you not be? We're in exile. the Aleph, the presence of God, is not yet. The Aleph that makes the whole difference. Everything stays the same. Nature, all the letters, most of the letters are the same. Others, nature stays as nature. Presence of God in nature, that it's not merely nature. And that's what we're learning Shar Yichud Ve'amunah now in the 12 chapters of the second part of Tanya, that, it's difficult to wrap your mind around, but that's what we're trying to do to understand the power of Creator within creation. Moshiach comes, we will see that reality, not just know it intellectually. We will experience that reality. Hence, the world doesn't need to change. In other words, from its natural being. Is that clear?
Rabbi, fine. I have a couple of quick questions.
Go ahead.
When you say that when Moshiach comes, we would have an understanding and an appreciation, is it because he is teaching, or is it by, and maybe this may not be the best word, by osmosis, we know differently? Just by his presence, his being, that we simply know?
Excellent question. Excellent question. So it's probably both. I mean, for sure, the teachings of Mashiach, right? And that's why, the study of Chassidus is a preparation for the coming of Mashiach, because the teachings of Mashiach are about not the do's and don'ts of Judaism, and not even about the mystical reality, but more about the truth of God and the reality of God in creation, in our relationship, what that means, right? Which is the first part of Tanya. So we will get it from the ultimate teacher, who's Mashiach. We will also get it then by osmosis. It's true, because now the world is full of klipa, right? There's the aleph of alufa shalolam, the presence of God, is not real, because klipa, shell, is covering over on the force of God within creation. When we do our part to bring Mashiach, so then it will break away the shell, and the presence of God will be, which he is. He's in the presence of everything. Will be real for us. So part of it is based on the fact that we learn today, and that learning we take with us, right? And therefore gives us the capacity now, as I said, aha, oh, that's what you're going to do, Denny, because you learned, Torah, you learned Chassidus, and you learned the idea, but it was an idea that was in the mind's eye. But now all of a sudden, now I see the realness of that idea in the world. So it'll be based on what we learned today. It will be based on what Mashiach will teach us then, and also by osmosis. So all of that's true. Okay, good question. And yet, anything else? So we're good, we're clear? Welcome, Katie. And Robert. So, very good. But now we're going to go a little deeper. And that was the easy stuff. Some of it we already learned. If we dig a little deeper, the Rebbe in the Sikha says, well, not so simple, because it seems on the surface to be contradicting what the Rambam says, what we just learned in the Rambam, what our sages teach us in the Talmud. So we have two places, one in the Medrash, Torah's Kahanim, that speaks about barren trees, in other words, non-fruit bearing trees. And the Talmud asks, the Medrash asks, how do we know, what's our scriptural source that in the ultimate future, meaning in times of Mashiach, that these trees will be edible fruit-bearing trees. That's what Medrash says. So the Torah's Kahanim Medrash says, from a verse in Leviticus, Vayikra, the trees of the field will produce their fruit. Eitz Nosei Piryei will carry its fruit. That's what it says. We have a similar concept in the conclusion of the Talmud tractate Kesubis, which is speaking about marriage contracts, but as every Talmud, piece of Talmud, stream of consciousness speaks about many different things as it goes on in conversation. It says, Rav Chia, the son of Ashi, said, in the name of Rav, what did he say? In the ultimate future, in the times of Mashiach, all barren trees in the land of Israel will bear fruit. Will bear fruit. How do we know? Where does this come from? So it brings a different verse from Yoel in Nach that says the trees will bear their fruit, and the fig trees and the vine will give forth their strength. So here very clearly the Talmud is telling us that there's going to be change in the nature of trees. Barren trees will now give forth fruit in the times of Mashiach. So on the surface of it, you might be able to explain, like the Rambam wrote, right? He mentioned about the prophets and their prophecy that they are what? Unless we know otherwise, they're an allegory, right? So the same thing as fruit-bearing trees. It's an allegory. And he even says what the allegory is. What's the allegory? A tree that bears fruit? Who's that? A Talmud Chacham, a Torah student who is, good in their studies. They bear fruit through their studies, as opposed to an ignorant person who doesn't study Torah, right? They're unlearned. They are called a barren tree. What will be in the times of Mashiach? Even the unlearned, the barren tree will also give fruit. Will also bear fruit. Is that clear? So you might want to say that. By the way, we have already an idea of our sages that tell us, that allegory is a very strong tool for education. Why? What's important about an allegory is sometimes it's hard to, to get an abstract idea, something that is theoretical. With a metaphor, brings it brings it more in an earthy manner. So what more earthy manner could you have than a tree, right? Or like, for example, in the Talmud speaks about Jews that are sinners. So Talmud says that there isn't a Jew that is a sinner that isn't full of mitzvahs, just as a pomegranate is full of seeds. Right? There was once a Satmar Chassid that came to the Rebbe. I mean, many Satmar Chassids came to the Rebbe for a bracha. And so the Rebbe asked this Chassid, what did your Rebbe say by the Tish? What did he say on Shabbat? Maybe it was on Shabbos, I don't recall now. But what words of Torah did he share? Thought for a moment. He says, he brought down where it says in the Talmud, how is it possible? I'm sorry, that the sages say that a sinning Jew is full of mitzvahs, just as a pomegranate is full of seeds. And he asked the question, how is it possible that a wicked person could be full of mitzvahs? He asked the question, how do you understand what the Talmud is speaking about? So Rebbe smiled and says, I also have a question on that piece of Talmud. I also don't understand it. I don't understand it, what our sages are saying, that if a Jew is full of mitzvahs, like a pomegranate is full of seeds, how do you call him wicked? The opposite direction, right? Anyways, what's the point I'm making over here? Point to be made is that, full of analogies, metaphors that are used, because ultimately the greatest thing that you could be is an educator of Torah, to teach Torah. That's what our sages are. That's what the Rebbe is, a teacher. So our sages, when they want to teach, they use allegory. So therefore, when it speaks about barren trees and fruit-bearing trees and what it means, so it was a metaphor. So that's what the Rebbe offers as an explanation, as that it shouldn't be a contradiction, because if the Rambam cannot contradict what the Talmud says, right? He can take, if there's two opinions, he can take one of two opinions he can go with for halacha. But the Talmud, whatever is there that has the final halachic rendering, one cannot go against it. So unless there's, a debate about this, which there wasn't, just a debate of, where you're going to get your source from. Well, we'll see a little more nuance in it shortly. But in the future, Mashiach's time, barren trees will be fruit bearing. How does that fit in? Oh, okay, so it'll be an allegory. So Rebbe says, well, that's a bit difficult to say, because prophets in prophecy, absolutely, that is a concept of allegory. But the sages, when they speak, right, when they speak, unless there's a reason to take it as an allegory, right, as opposed to prophets, the whole thing is given it as in riddle, an allegory, when God gives them a message, communicates with them. But the sages in their teachings, yes, they'll use metaphor to convey an idea, but that's only if that's specifically what they're trying to do. But generally speaking, the sages don't speak in allegory, they speak in very direct language. How so? How do we understand that? Excuse me 1 second. It's just a call. I think it's hello. Yes. Hi. Yes. Oh. Oh no. Oh, I'm sorry. I can talk to him. Hold on 1 second. Hold on. I'm going to give my son and he will. Hold on 1 second. 1 second. Mendel, the air conditioning's on. It's on the roof. Okay. Hello? Okay. So just whatever he needs help with, okay? The air conditioning's not working in the shul. My apologies. We have some air conditioning problems in the shul. And that was the technician. So, sorry, I was just in the middle of saying, I lost my train of thought.
Speaking of what allegories and
oh, but when the sages are, what are the sages? They're primarily, their responsibility is in halachic ruling, and of course in leadership. But when it comes to Torah, it's halachic rulings. So they have to speak direct, unless there's a reason to say otherwise. It is going to be direct language. Furthermore, in the piece of the Talmud and the piece of the Medrash that they're speaking, it was speaking about material blessings in a very literal sense. Everything was speaking literal. So now that it would speak metaphorically would be incongruent. So the Rebbe says we can't use that as an answer to the Rambam. Is that clear? Mendel, it's okay? Yes, that's what I said. Please to be on it because we won't have air conditioning. Thank you. Sorry. So the Rebbe says that we can't use that as an answer. Now, the rivet is a commentator that often will speak up against teachings from the Rambam. He is not a contemporary in the same generation, but not far off, and he often will question things from the Rambam. And he takes issue because he doesn't even if you don't go to the Talmud, go to Chumash. In Vayikra, it says there clearly that I will remove hostile beasts from the land. And he says this is not an allegory. So we have our problem from the Talmud that we brought up. The rivet says, well, there's also a problem from Chumash in Leviticus, that in the time to come that God will remove the hostile beasts from the land. So obviously that's something that is beyond nature, right? I don't know if you notice, folks, but in the last 5,000 years, humanity has progressed in our living standards, but a lion, the same lion in the same jungle, there's no difference. Hasn't gotten anywhere. King of the jungle, hasn't improved its living conditions. I mean, unless man did put them into, a cage. But that's an improvement, or a different story, but you get the drift. So the fact that they will then not be hostile, well, that's a change in nature. This is what the rivet asks on the Rambam. So another commentator called the vats. Is everybody with me? Is this too complicated stuff for you? Karen, it's good? We're good? Eliana? Katie? Leva, Davida? Yeah, we're good. Eugenia?
I'm just listening. I don't know any of the names, though. Not familiar with the names.
Okay, just their ABC, that's all. Don't worry about the name.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he explains as follows. He says as follows. If you look carefully at the sages from the Medrash versus the Talmud, we see something different. Torah's Kahanim, the Medrash, speaks about barren trees becoming fruit trees without making any kind of modification. Where? The Talmud in Ksubas, when it says, it speaks about barren trees in the land of Israel. In the land of Israel. There, they will become fruit-bearing trees, but not the rest of the world. Is that clear? So he wanted to make a suggestion like this. And based on that distinction, this is the difference between the rivet and the Rambam. The rivet holds according to the Medrash, that the Medrash says what? What does the Medrash say? that is the entire world, all barren trees will become fruit-bearing trees. A miracle will happen everywhere. And he wants to say, and likewise will be the same thing for wild animals. And the Rambam goes according to the Talmud that it's only going to be in the land of Israel, but not the rest of the world. And likewise with wild beasts. And that's a distinction to make. So therefore, will the world be going by nature? Yes. Except for the land of Israel. That's how the Vats wants to explain the Rambam, and also this way we all understand the rivet, right? They're going according to two different opinions. Is that clear?
And what would be the actual borders of the land of Israel in those days?
That's a good question, but we'll deal. Let's deal with that another. That's a digression right now. And
Okay.
okay, I want to, because this is tough enough stuff that we should keep our focus on this. But good question. Okay. So the Rebbe says the Radvat's answer is problematic. Why is it problematic? He says because in the Rambam, let's hear his words. He says one should not entertain the notion that in the era of Mashiach, any element of the natural order will be nullified. Is he making a distinction? Did he say like the rest of the world? Like sort of even implying like the rest of the world except for one part of the world, Israel? No. He says you shouldn't entertain the notion that in the time of Mashiach, natural order will be nullified. He's not explicitly saying any distinction between the land of Israel and other lands. And he's not even implying it in any manner. So it includes natural order will be even in the land of Israel. Is that clear? Furthermore, the Rebbe brings a proof. This is all against, right, the answer that the Radvat wants to give. So the Rebbe brings another proof. Then from the previous chapter, in chapter 11, if you recall, that when we spoke about Moshiach, does Moshiach need to do miracles and wonders to prove that he's Moshiach? Anybody? Yes or no?
No.
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 I think
Oh,
not, no.
exactly. How do we know that? Anybody? How do we know that? That that's the fact? Because Rabbi Akiva and the sages in their day did not ask Bar Kochva ben Kuziba to do any kind of wonders, any kind of miracles to prove that he was Mashiach, and they all believed that he was Mashiach. So you don't have to do any wonders. So Mashiach himself doesn't have to be a person of wonders, right? Doesn't need to make miracles. So it's logical to conclude that the Rambam will maintain that also in the times of Mashiach, there will not be wonders and miracles. Because if there's wonders and miracles, who would be the genesis of it all? Mashiach. But Mashiach doesn't need to have that talent, that skill, that capability. So if it's not by Mashiach, why would it be in the times of Mashiach? So he says, no, that can't be the answer. So now he wants to bring another commentator. You with me, folks? You got your Talmudic caps on. You gotta, sort of make you think on a Thursday afternoon, hot days, So he now brings a different commentator called the Avodas HaKodesh. And he wants to make a distinction as follows. Rambam says that the nature of the world will not change, right? But what world are we talking about? What nature? From when? From when? So he says if you go back to before the sin of Adam and Eve with the tree of knowledge of good and evil, what kind of world did they live in? What was the nature of the world? Which that world was not in heaven, that world was here on earth. So what was it? There were no barren trees. All trees gave forth fruit. All animals were not hostile. That's what it was in Gan Eden. With the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, now there were some trees that became barren and some trees that bear fruit, and some animals that are could be domesticated, and others that are hostile. So when we say that the nature of the world is not going to change, so therefore these two things that were before by the times of Adam and Eve, before they sinned, this was the nature of the world. So we'll go back to that. So it's not uprooting nature. It's not, yes, hostile animals will be, removed or, right? This is what he explains. Is that clear?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, Vilma.
So it's my understanding that during that time there was no death. What is your opinion on that?
When in the times of before the sin of, it's a clear verse in the Torah. It's clear in the Torah. Because of eating of tree of knowledge of good and evil, that's brought death to the world. That's a very clear.
So does that mean that after Moshiach comes, there will be no death eventually?
So that's already a different conversation, and not for the moment. We're going to have a course on that when we do the course in the summer on Trias Amesim. We'll delve into that. A very good question, but it's off topic at the moment, and it's not a simple, not a simple yes and no in the moment.
Okay, thank you.
A good question, excellent question. So, so the Rebbe says this answer is also not sufficient. Why? So the nuance of what happened with the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or all trees being barren, it was a what's the word? It sort of to speak was not the nature of the tree to be that way. It was kind of an imposition in the Garden of Eden. And to get into the details now without seeing the verses and stuff would be a bit difficult. So it's not truly its nature. It was sort of like superimposed upon it of the non-fruit, the ones who became barren afterwards. The only reason they weren't barren is because I don't know if imposed is the right word, not the correct term, but meaning it wasn't their nature, so to speak. That's one thing that Rebbe says. And the second thing that Rebbe says is that when the Rambam is speaking about, the natural order of the world, let us remember that the Garden of Eden lasted for a few hours. But for 5,780 plus years, the nature of the world is there's barren trees, animals, there's hostile wild animals. That is what you call the world. That is when Rambam it's not implied at all in the words of Rambam, that kind of nuanced thought. He's just saying that there's not going to be any difference. The world will be as we know it. Well, we don't know it for the few hours it was in Garden of Eden. And therefore, it'd be very difficult to say that in the Rambam, this is what his meaning is when he says this. So we're left with a problem that we need a solution to. It seems from the teachings of our sages that there is things that are extraordinary, not the nature of things, barren trees bearing fruit, animals, wild animals that are tamed. And we need to understand what is that? How does the Rambam say that the nature of the world will not change? It will still be it will be as is. We will continue this thought. We're not going to give the answer today because we're out of time and I got to go. But we will continue this thought. Going to remember the where we're at? We'll continue and get a deeper understanding of the Rambam's teachings. But here we had an in-depth discussion on it. Liba, I see your hand is up.
But yes, Rabbi, I just had a quick question.
Sure.
Is this also related to the conclusion of Shabbos prayer, where it says, and there shall be no male, female, or cattle that's barren among you?
Yes, because Shabbos is Yom Shekulei Shabbos. Shabbos is a metaphor or a sampling, an experience of the times of Mashiach, right? The tranquility, where we have the peace, where we have the sense of connectivity, much more than we do during the week. So therefore, on Shabbos being a sampling of the times to come, so in our prayer we make mention to that which will be, as the sages call it, Yom Shekulei Shabbos, a day that is all but only Shabbos. Yeah. And with that, I wish everybody good Shabbos. Perfect segue. Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
All right, folks. So that
Okay.
we will continue our conversation on this as we continue further understanding teachings of the Rambam in the laws of Mashiach. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day, a good Chodesh, and a wonderful Shabbos.
Good
Same to
Shabbos.
you.
Be well, everyone. Thank you.